Good morning. Get your coffee, get your cookies, all that good stuff. Sit down. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I'm used to the booming, echoing mic in the sanctuary. When I turn this one on, I'm like, that sounds quiet to me. But if you can hear me, that's good. I can hear myself. So I made it back, obviously. Dad's surgery went fine. I know a bunch of you have had joints replaced, so this is not new news to you, but it went fine. I had to laugh. His mantra through the week was, this was a lot more painful than I thought it would be. Anybody have that experience? Yeah. Because this is the guy that almost cut his arm off with a chainsaw, and then called my sister, or his sister, to see if he should go to the doctor. So he thought he had a pretty high pain tolerance. And I had to, everybody he called, he had a lot of people that were calling to check up on him. Every single person, he was like, this is some of the worst pain I've ever been in. I think he thought all these people that had joints replaced, they were just a bunch of whiners, So he learned, didn't he? But it went well. I just talked to him this morning. He's surviving on his own, but I left him with about 3 months worth of food in the fridge and the freezer, and got the ice in a convenient location where he can access it without having to go up or down any stairs, so it's up to him now. But he has his first PT appointment tomorrow, which will be traumatizing, I'm sure. But travel went well. Flight out was good. Flight back was a little bit interesting. So I flew out of Alpena County Regional Airport, which is basically, this flight to Detroit is the only commercial flight that comes in or out of Alpena County Regional Airport. I think there's more, but that's the only one that I noticed. But it's a small airport, so you go through security when you board the plane, right? You get there, there's a ticket counter, and they actually have a kiosk now, there's like a Delta kiosk, like in a real airport. But you sit in the lobby until they're ready to board, and then they invite you through security. So, and the nice thing was I didn't need to get there until like an hour before the flight. I probably could have got there 15 minutes before and been fine, because I was already checked in. But I got there an hour before, and I was just sitting there. And at about 45 minutes before the flight, the security guy comes on, and he says, blah, 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 line up. We're gonna start welcoming you through. Make sure you've got your boarding pass and your ID. And then my stomach dropped, and I realized I'd left my wallet at my dad's house, which is 20 minutes away. It snowed not a foot. It snowed significantly the night before, and I have 45 minutes before the flight takes off. So luckily, our neighbor Al Wong, who lives 5 minutes down the road from us, drove over to my dad's, picked it up, and dropped it off. And I thought I only had minutes to spare. Turns out the flight from Detroit was a half hour late getting in. But then it was a half hour late getting out, which meant I was a half hour late getting into Detroit. So I missed my connecting flight from Detroit to Seattle. So I ended up having to go Alpena to Detroit to Atlanta to Portland. So I got in at 8 instead of 5, but I made it. So it wasn't too bad. The flights are pretty smooth, which was my priority. But I'm back. Thank you for your prayers, especially. Very much appreciated. He's on the road to recovery. So this is our last town hall before the end of the year. I'm going to give you a little bit of framing, and then I'm going to have Paul talk a little bit about something that he shared with me, which is, I think, also very good framing. He wrote some good stuff on there. I'll have him talk about that a little bit. I was going to project something. So while I'm getting that set up, I'm going to keep talking. Just a reminder: these town halls are meant to be a public forum, right? So this is an opportunity for us to talk about things together, and they are topical. But I've got a bit of an agenda at the beginning. But if you want to bring other stuff up at any point through the thing, don't hesitate to do so. But I've got 3 different topics, which you'll see in just a moment after I finish connecting, which I had started to do and I got distracted. Andy showed me a meme that says, okay, let me back up. about 7 years ago, Alen came home from work, and she told me, I learned a new American idiom today. And I asked her, what is it? And she says, organize your ducks. I said, you're so close. You're so close. It's get your ducks in a row. So, but that's what I give her crap about it to this day. I say, Alen, are your ducks all organized? And she understands them. But anyways, Andy showed me a meme that says, I don't have any ducks, and they're not in rows. I just have squirrels, and they're everywhere. Which I feel like pretty much describes my organizational capacity to a T. All I have are squirrels and everything. This is going to take a little bit to connect. So the three things that I want to talk about today are related to what Paul's going to talk about, but it's music, community, and service. And I'll talk more about those as we get into them. But kind of the theme, actually, Paul, you want to share your thing? There's a mic right there.
Sure, yeah.
As a framing idea.
Yeah, as a framing idea. I've been gone a few weeks, but when I go to D.C. to see my son and daughter-in-law and my other daughter, I worship on Sunday morning at the Franciscan Monastery of the Holy Land in America. That's the name of the monastery. And it's a few blocks from my son. And so it's convenient, but I love going there because I love certain things like Gregorian chant and things like that. So the people who worship at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning at the monastery, I've noticed are the same people over and over, but they are people who know their part very well in their liturgy. They have a very traditional liturgy, and what happens is there's a procession of garbed people who come in, along with about 20 little altar boys behind a priest, and they proceed into a Latin liturgy that all the people know, and they know exactly their part. They know when to stand and sit. They don't have a piece of paper in front of them, but they don't sing. The choir of monks sings, and the people listen. So it got me to thinking a little bit, and then Pat told me about her experience at New Hope, where she felt like an audience member in a performance. And so I thought that we would do well to frame what we do here as liturgy, which is traditionally the people's work, and it's really the great revolution of Martin Luther in terms of worship, to take the focus off just of the priest who did everything for the people. But to be fair, he was the one entrusted with that because, again, the people weren't literate. He could read the scriptures. He could, and it was always a he could do the preaching. He could do all the presiding. But the whole thing was seen as sacramental, not just the Mass of the sacrifice of the Mass. So the Lutheran take on worship was established as it's not just the priest performing, it is the people who are offering a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving and of petition. And so it was those three things that distinguished the Lutheran understanding of what people did when they got together on a Sunday morning. In America, I think we've gone very, very far toward, we've hired a very expensive performer, and that's how people view pastoral work to too large a degree in the United States, I think. So, and we're just part of a larger phenomenon there. But when people come into our presence, they often expect to sit and have a performer perform for them, rather than say, we participate because we are the people of God, and God has acted upon all of us, and we respond to that. So it's much more of a communal thing rather than a top-down, pope through bishop to priest kind of experience. And I have no qualms with the worship that I've been able to attend outside of our tradition, but what we have been set up to do is this thing where we act out something. So one piece of that I just wanted to bring up was the part of our worship where we pass the peace. It used to be the peace was hardly passed, if you want to say it that way, during worship. But the symbolic piece of that was simply the biblical understanding that if you had something against your neighbor, you went and reconciled yourself with that neighbor before you came to the altar. And so we act that out every week. But I think in many ways we have lost the sense of the symbolism of that. That is that we are greeted and greet one another as forgivers and as each other representing that if we have sinned against others, which we inevitably have but often don't recognize, that we reconcile with them before we bring our common worship together to God. So that's my framing of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
And this is very good because as we talk about things today, I would like you to keep that framework, that context at the front of everything, which is, as we talk about worship, the modern experience kind of tends to lead us in this direction of, well, worship is the stuff that the staff puts on, right? Paul talked about, this being the norm, especially outside of mainline traditions. I think it was last week, might have been the week before. Again, I got squirrels, not ducks. I can't remember. Towards the end of my sermon, I said something, which is that one of the great transformations that I see taking place, or I should say one of the great opportunities for transformation that I see taking place in a Lutheran context, and maybe beyond that, but especially in a Lutheran context, is to reclaim that original idea that Luther had, which was prying worship from the cold, clammy fingers of the priests and embracing it for ourselves. And one of the things that I would like to do today is think about that in a bit of a holistic perspective. And again, this isn't, and I don't mean to denigrate any other worship experiences, but this is what we do. Does that make sense? This is what we do. Others do it differently. This is how we do it. And I think that there is an opportunity in the way that the world is changing for us to claim an identity of, this is our church, this is our community, these are our people, this is our worship, and this is what we do. Okay? Does that kind of make sense? And it's not me trying to get out of work. Not at all. Because actually, it tends to go the opposite direction, is that the more that you all are involved, the more that I have to do, right? If it's just me, I get to play dictator and tell you what we're going to do, and nobody gets to question my decisions. Let me make one thing clear. I'm going to retain some of my despotic power, no matter what, because at the end of the day, I can only tolerate so much chaos. I've already got squirrels I have to deal with. So at the end of the day, I kind of, maintain my authority that's in my letter of call, that puts me as Lord and Master over the worship service. I'm kidding. I'm being a little bit snarky here, but just keep that in mind. Okay, I put 3 things down up here, which are music, community, and service. And again, they're a little bit vague. We're gonna get into some detail there, and feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, interrupt at any point. You know me. I can just keep going until you're done. Oh. Because I was thinking ahead. I don't know why. Thank you. Why did I put December 12th? There's something happening on December 12th. It's a Thursday. I think it's somebody's birthday. I don't know. Is it really? Of course that's what I was thinking. It's the day of the Virgin of Guadalupe. You just have that in the top of your head, don't you, Cheryl Ann? She is a worship calendar personified. 30 years of this crap, and you can't shut it off, I'm sure. And we don't have to stick to any order here. We can bounce around between these three topics, but let me introduce each of the three topics, okay? So first of all, music, okay? By and large, I think we have pretty great music at Milwaukie Lutheran, okay? It's different than it was 5 years ago because we went from having two unique expressions of music to kind of alternating and or blending those expressions of music. That being said, as somebody who has a lot of anxiety around how a service flows, does that make sense? I emceed concerts and events and all kinds of stuff in Fort Wayne, and what I got good at was making sure that things fit together, right? And making sure that everything kind of made sense, which is, I was just venting to my dad about this, which is why one of the things I changed a few years back is I love to have people who aren't members of the church have memorial services here, but I'm never going to do one where I'm supposed to be there, but I'm not preaching, because I can't do it. You can have it, you can do it, right? But either I'm doing it or somebody else is doing it. But it's nails on a chalkboard to me, even when it's good. Anyways, so I'm good at sensing, is this going well or is this awkward? And there are a lot of things in the worship service that I don't know. This isn't me patting myself on the back, but just kind of, indicating to you what I'm doing and what the musicians are doing, aside from doing the obvious, which is playing the music, which is how do we cue things, right? And each does it differently. Kit, as soon as I come up for the reading of the gospel, I will say, please rise for the reading of the gospel, and then he launches into the gospel acclamation. Cindy, as soon as I stand up, is like, boom. And you know what? I like it that way. It keeps us on our toes. But there is a lot of thought that goes into, does this flow smoothly? And one of the tough things that's always been about blended worship, to use that phrase, is does it flow? And it can be a little bit jarring to go from more contemporary music to the Lord be with you, Thank you. I'm glad I got you trained. Yeah.
Introduce something different,
Yeah.
maybe even unique, keeps us on our toes.
Yeah. And do not underestimate how much of the Lutheran service is designed to keep you all awake, right? We're making you stand up, sit down, say things, and I'm being a little bit snarky, but it's to keep you engaged, right? It's to help you. It's to remind you that this is our worship, not my worship, and you're participating in it. But all this is a way of saying that that's one of the things that I do. This is part of what I get paid to do, is make sure that everything fits together and flows and isn't awkward. And I'm constantly refining that. That being said, for probably the last 4 years, ever since Cheryl Ann left, I have been ruling in a dictatorship over the music of this congregation, to a certain extent. Especially during COVID, when we were doing worship videos, I picked everything, whether you liked it or not. And what I tend to do is I pick hymns that I know and I like that fit with the theme, right? And I try to pick things that I know you can sing, okay? If you can't sing them, it's not worth doing. But now it's a little bit different in that when Kit is with us, which is the majority of the year, Kit picks music. When the choir is singing, the choir picks music, and then I pick an opening hymn. One of the things that I would like to do in terms of moving back to how we participate is something that I kind of killed almost 11 years ago now, which is a worship and or a music team, okay? Which is, I would like to have us pick music again. And not just music, but a lot of different parts of the service. So one of the things that we used to do, and I hate using that phrase, but one of the things that we used to do is we also were a little bit more creative in the liturgical parts of our service. We used to do different versions of the creed, different versions of the Lord's Prayer, etc. And I know for some of you, that is nails on a chalkboard. You're like, no, the Apostles' Creed, the creed is this way, the Lord's Prayer is this way, it's thou, not you. You know? I mean, talk about splitting hairs. But how many people is our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name? And how many people, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name? Yeah. And how many of you will die on that hill? Yeah, much less when you remember we used to do the New Zealand Lord's Prayer, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So we need variety. Keeps you on your toes. And again, the idea is that we cycle through stuff. None of it's permanent, right? None of it's set in stone. But there's an Alleluia that we've been doing at synod events, which I love, and I can't find which resource hymnal it's in, but it's a Native American Hallelujah, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And I think it would especially be absolutely gorgeous on a day when we have the choir there, because it's made to be. And I'm not gonna ruin you by singing it for you right now. But that's just an example of there are resources out there that we have not even begun to tap into. Another one of those is that we are progressive in that we do have the Cranberry hymnal. Believe it or not, there are many congregations out there that never embraced the ELW. They doubled down in the LBW and have stuck with it ever since. There are new worship resources available, one of which is the newest songbook called All Creation Sings. Has anybody heard of All Creation Sings? Yeah, probably just a few of us. That kind of got slipped in there. There was not a lot of fanfare when it came out. In fact, I think it took me 6 months to even realize that Augsburg had published something new. And as with all things new, I was dubious about it at first. And by dubious, I mean I just didn't check it out. But I have been checking it out, and there's some really good music in it. And some of the music is really cool because they took some contemporary artists that aren't worship music artists and turned their music into worship music. One of the good examples, has anybody ever listened to the band Gungor? G-U-N-G-O-R, Gungor? There's what's his first name? It's a husband-wife duo, and they were on the pop scene for a long time, kind of in that liminal space between worship music or Christian music and contemporary and just regular pop music. There's some David Gungor. There's some David Gungor songs that are in the ACS that are absolutely gorgeous. Last week, I think it was, I quoted to you, God makes beautiful things out of us. God makes beautiful things out of the dust. I quoted that to you. That's one of his songs. This is something I'd like to incorporate. I'm not necessarily saying we go out and buy 100 copies of ACS, but what we can do, because we have a publishing license through Augsburg, is we can copy things from ACS and put it in our hymnal. But this is the kind of thing that I have squirrels, we've already established that, but I also have limited mental capacity for stuff. So one of the benefits of having a team of people is that we quadruple or quintuple our imagination capacity. I'm just dropping this out here right now, okay? I'm not gonna press gang anybody today. And in fact, one of the learnings that I have had over the past 5 years, and it's been reflected in our council as well too, is we can't expect people to do things forever and ever, amen. Which was kind of our council model for a long time. Was we keep people on right up through their term limits until they're absolutely burned out and never want to be on council ever again. And we're getting away from that. In fact, most of our council members now have said, you get one term out of me, and then I'm going to rotate off and let somebody else take over, which is absolutely terrifying for me. All right? Because we've got a really great council right now, but it's absolutely healthy for the congregation because it lets the congregation, participate in what we do. I'm imagining a similar thing for worship, which is that it doesn't even need to be a fixed membership. I'm tossing around a couple of ideas, one of which is doing like a drop-in worship planning once a month. And everything's on the table, right? Music, liturgy. In fact, I've been just kind of, I have an unofficial schedule of liturgies that is in the back of my head, which is basically we do something 1 through 4 during the time after during the latter end of the time after Pentecost. We do setting 10 immediately after Pentecost. We do now the Feast of Thanksgiving from Easter to Pentecost. We do setting 5 during Lent, and then we do 1 through 6 during Epiphany and or Christmas. Right? That's been my schedule. There are 10 very good settings in the ELW. There are 2 more settings in All Creation Sings, which we can look at. But there's also some opportunities there that I might not be aware of, which again, having a group of people means that there's more imaginative capacity. So I'm just dropping that. And what that might look like, like I was saying, are drop-in meetings. So once a month, beginning of the month, or actually probably the end of the month, we get together on, a Wednesday afternoon, whoever wants to show up, and that's the day that we plan worship for the month to come, okay? And I'm not saying that things are going to be magic overnight, but one of the things I hope to see is that as we do more participation, you all have more ownership in the service, but more excitement around everything. Not that I don't think you're not excited, but the entropy, the tendency towards entropy in this case, is a tendency towards audience, right? It's much easier to fall back into that, I'm just going to sit back in the pew and let it wash over me, as opposed to I'm actively engaged in what's going on. And I'll be frank with you, I think the future is engagement. I don't think the future is passive. I think that there are plenty of churches out there that do that way better than we'll ever be able to do it. We can't afford a rock band. We can't even afford one member of a rock band. And it's not just about money either. It's not what we do. It's not what we do. Go. Yeah, I've been talking.
Thinking about the once a month thing, I think for picking the music and stuff is a good idea, but there's a piece about doing it seasonally
Yes.
that makes really good sense.
Yes.
Because if you're skipping around all the time, people that visit don't have a clue about what we're doing.
Yes.
So I guess I would say think about doing, something for Epiphany, something for Lent, and keep it fluid, but make it just the.
By the way, I'm taking notes up there. I learned my lesson from last time. Rather than trying to write things on the board and then take a picture of it and then make notes, I'm just going to take notes while we're talking. You can all see me taking notes. Saves us a lot of time. Saves our council secretary a lot of time as well too. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and in fact, this is nothing. So we just had this class for our confirmation kids. This was the class 2 Sundays ago. We opened up the ELW, and we talked about, here's the quiz. What are the 4 components of our worship service from beginning to end? Gathering. Thank you. A student. Meal. Yeah. Yep, sending. And so Ollie and Madeline and Henry and I went through a generic setting, and we looked at it, and I had them kind of guess which parts go where, and we talked about why do they go there and what do they mean in that context. Which, this is, if you're getting bored on a Sunday morning, try that. Open up your bulletin and look and ask the question, why is the Kyrie part of the gathering? Why is the confession and forgiveness part of it? Why are the prayers of the people part of the meal? Really fun. So that's what we did. Seasonal, right, is a wonderful part of this, right? We talk about the things that are ancient. This is ancient, okay? The way that our worship, what's the beginning of our worship year, everybody? Today. Today is New Year's Day for the majority of mainline Protestant churches in the United States of America. Happy New Year. It's the first Sunday in Advent, which is typically the first Sunday after Thanksgiving, sort of. Go ahead, Paul. Adiaphora. Great word. I threw this out at somebody and I got a cross-eyed look.
Okay, so adiaphora means the periphery of the circle, if you want to call it that, okay? It's like, okay, those things are changeable, but what's the core, you know? So how do we keep the Jesus core,
Yep.
right, in worship? And then what radiates out of that? And then what's an expression of a group of people in a particular place and their language and all that stuff? So what's adiaphoras and what's core? But also just to say that seasonally, I was just going to say this before I hand the mic back to today is the beginning of the Christmas cycle, right?
Yep.
That goes through Epiphany, and then we have an ordinary time until Lent. Actually, there's that hinge between the Christmas cycle and the Easter cycle, which is called Transfiguration Sunday.
Yeah.
So we transform from Christmas people to Easter people, and then that goes through Pentecost, and then we have this ordinary time thing that I don't think we've ever figured out. But anyway, there you go.
Ordinary time is vanilla time. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Vers-
Bread.
versus kinky time?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That would be a Sunday to
That
remember.
would be, yes, it would. The other thing is that some people don't understand is that not everything that's in the liturgy has to be done.
It's all a rubric. Everything's
Yes,
a rubric.
Everything's a rubric.
In fact, I would say that really the only it's not set in stone, but the only thing that we really try to hold to is this.
Yes.
Yeah, this is not adiaphora, which I'll just speak to really quickly. And I've ranted about this before, but for me, and this is my perspective, the importance about this is it places the emphasis here, okay? Everything is going towards this, and then we leave from that. Contrasted, and again, this is not about knocking on other traditions, but by and large, if you go to a quote-unquote non-denominational, everything's going towards this. Right, so the pastor gets the last word, they do the mic drop, and then they ask you to give money and you leave while the band's playing. And that's not me being snarky, that's what it's like, yeah. Andy, go ahead.
Hi, not being snarky, but why were, like when I grew up, the meal was maybe monthly,
Yeah.
and I've heard places where it's seasonally or
Piety.
yearly.
Piety, that's why. Pietism, Scandinavians is stoicism. That's why, no. By and large, no, I mean, this is actually a fascinating historical aspect. And here's the thing. It was not about the diminishing of the value of this. In fact, many of the pietists would argue as the opposite, is that you only do it when you appreciate it, right? I mean, how many of you grew up in a congregation where there were people that did not partake in communion because they didn't feel like they were ready for it? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Had plenty of those in Lear Lutheran Church growing up. Yeah, so it's not so much that this was not the center. It's just that it was there's a much different emphasis. Obviously, things have transformed. God has transformed the way that we work with this. It came in small increments. One of the increments that I experienced was communing children that weren't confirmed. Yeah. Cynthia. It's a big no-no.
Just terrible.
Yeah.
And if you joined their church, you had to be rebaptized because you had to choose it. And what I like about the every Sunday Eucharist is the same. It really emphasizes it's a gift.
Yep.
It's not something we earn.
Straight out of the small catechism right there, Cynthia. You're going to teach confirmation tonight, or this afternoon. I'm going home early. Cynthia's teaching the boys, and Madeline. This is exactly what we talked about with our confirmation class, was we went through Luther's small catechism. And the fun thing about this is that Madeline is she's a spy. Madeline, half of her family is from a Catholic tradition, so Madeline goes to St. Mary's in downtown Portland. So one of the reasons that she's taking confirmation with us is she wanted to have the Lutheran experience, considering that her grandfather was a Lutheran pastor. She wants both sides of the coin, so to speak. But yeah, that's very much, a significant part of this. Yeah. Andy.
So also in, again, not being snarky, but going back to the meal, in our travels that we've been involved with, we've seen different ways of the meal. And I kind of think that a variation of that might be something to think about as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, 2 examples. One was in Australia, where the meal was handed out to the members of the congregation, and it was a smaller church. The pastor and his assistant were in the middle. They handed everything out, and then everyone communed together in unison.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting.
Cool.
The other one was in Greece. In Greece, on a small island, where the bread that was shared was brought in to the church, and I think this was after Easter, so it might have been seasonal for them. And it was put on the altar, and we're talking, 50 loaves. And then afterwards, the members of the congregation took the bread and gave it to the town.
That is straight back to first century early church. For those of you that participated in our early Christianity course, this is going to be a repeat for some of you. This is like, when I say early Christianity, we're talking contemporary to the Gospel of Mark Christianity, which is that when you became a Christian, at that point meant when you joined the Jewish cult of Christianity, of following Jesus, you would prepare for baptism for a year. Everybody was baptized on the Easter Vigil, right? And then Sunday morning of Easter was the first time that you participated in the community meal. So the way that worship worked is you would come in on a Sunday morning, you would have Bible study, exposition on the Word, et cetera. Then the people that weren't baptized yet would leave, and the people that were baptized would participate in the community meal. And then they would take the community meal and bring it to everybody else, including the unbaptized and the widow and the orphan and the stranger, right? So that is a callback straight to this. And I'm not ready for that segue quite yet, but that is going to be the segue into community and service. Okay, that is beautiful. And I will say about the meal, and again, thank you, Paul, for the helpful language of adiaphora. In terms of what is core for us and what is adiaphora, there are some theological issues which we have not approached that yet in any way, shape, or form. There are also things that are core because they are necessary from a strategic standpoint, which is, and I don't know if anybody has realized that we used to commune at the rail, and we stopped communing at the rail post-COVID to avoid, creating an infection vector at the front. But we have not gone back to the rail because it's hard for some of y'all to get up the stairs. And that ratio of people for whom stairs are difficult has increased over time. My dad now is one of the people for whom stairs are an issue. God bless him. That's why we continue to commune in front. But that's a practical thought. There are many strategic and adaptive ways to think creatively about the meal, and those are 2 really wonderful examples. I'll throw in a third, which, where's Brenda? Brenda, where are you? Okay. Ken, did you go with Brenda when you guys went to Salt and Light? And at Salt and Light, the kids serve communion. Once a month, they have a kids Sunday, and the kids distribute the bread and to everybody, which is something I'd like to do. We might need to strategically think about how we make that happen, but that's going to be on when we get down to community as well, that's going to be another thing I want to talk about. This is great thinking, and this is what the worship team will do, right? Because again, I think there's also this tendency to think that, again, it's just the way we used to be organized too. There was a specialized group of 5 people that did all the worship stuff, and if you wanted to do the worship stuff, you had to wait for somebody to leave that special group and you could join, right? But then it got to the point where nobody wanted to join, and there were those same 5 people that were stuck doing it forever and ever, amen. Because if they left, the team would dissolve, which is exactly what happened. When I finally did holy closure for the worship and music team, right, and the adult ed team, you know. Well, today we're going to be talking about death and new life, right? But this is what we're witnessing here is death and new life, right? The old way of doing it ran its course. Let's talk about taking some of that old way, but doing it in a new way, which is this kind of thinking is exactly what we need to talk about. And here's the important part too, and this is why we have a team that does it, is I need help with that kind of stuff, okay? We've already talked about my capacity, which varies from week to week, depending on how many people are in the hospital or sick or dying. So implementing something like what Andy just talked about, which is let's commune, and I'm just, this is not set in stone, I'm just throwing out an idea here. Let's commune, okay? And on the altar, we have maybe, I don't know, some cans of food that go to our blessing boxes. We have backpacks for our backpack buddies, which then go get packed by our backpack buddies, and we have items for our ROW pantry, and they're all on the altar. And when I bless the meal, you take that stuff and bring it to our community. Okay, go ahead, Pat.
Well, I think the sermon should be getting us ready for the meal.
Absolutely.
I mean, where there's the whatever it is in the season of the year, but I also think that with what we're hearing, it should get us ready.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the idea behind this organizational structure, right? Is that ideally, and not, hopefully almost every Sunday, this ends with the good news. One aspect of the good news, whether it's new life, forgiveness, all of those things which we experience in a physical form in the bread and wine, And I don't know if you notice this too. There's a lot of pieces of the service that I ad-lib. I was sharing this with the confirmation kids last week. Are you aware I don't do the words of institution per the book? Yeah. Paul is every Sunday. I can see him flinch. I do, it's a cringe, it's not I do the first stanza of the words of institution. The night in which he was betrayed, our Lord Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke it, gave it to his disciples, say, take and eat, this is my body given for you, do this. Okay. That's orthodox. The second stanza, stanza is the wrong word. Second petition, I do a little bit differently. I'll tell you why I do it differently. It's not because I forget it every Sunday. It's because when I was in seminary, I worked 3 jobs, one of which was doing music for the University of Minnesota campus ministry. And the pastor there, when she presided over communion, she would pause. And then after supper, he took a cup, gave thanks, blessed it, gave it to his disciples, saying, this cup is a new covenant. And she would pause there every time and then say, comma, a new promise, because she knew that college kids didn't understand the distinction between, covenant and promise. And she wanted to make sure that she knew this wasn't a signed agreement that you're entering into with Jesus. This is a promise, like Cynthia was talking about, from God. That stuck with me. I've never been able to remember the original version ever since. So I probably could force myself to go back to it, but it's the way I've done it for 16 years. I'm an old dog. Don't make me learn new tricks. But speaking of ad-libbing, when we get to the post-communion, so we go through the words of institution, blessing, blah, blah, blah. I give you all instruction, and then I give the invitation to the table. Sundays and Seasons and or the ELW has set invitations to the table that are printed every week, which change seasonally. I wrote that down somewhere, okay? I never do any of them because I use that opportunity as a callback to the sermon. So I use that opportunity to reiterate the promise that I hopefully made in the sermon as the invitation to the meal. Does that make sense? Paul, he is pulling back the curtain. If there's a point that I left out of the sermon, I have an opportunity to say it during the invitation to the table. Right? If I get there and I'm like, I don't think they got that piece, I hit you over the head again with it when I call you forward to the table. And then I have another opportunity to do that before the benediction as well, too. Yeah, you shh. Don't give all our secrets away. It does keep it interesting. Where was I going with this? Anyways, word focusing on meal. Okay. We don't have, by the way, we don't have to drop these things here, right? We can even talk about these during a regular regular education hour. I'm trying to jettison the adult word from, none of us are adults. Let's talk about community a little bit. Okay, so this is one of my big pieces. So as Paul was talking about, liturgy being people's work, we tend to think that is bounded by the sharing of the peace and the benediction. But who pointed out, somebody said something about the sending, being sent out. Well, Andy, when you're talking about we take the meal and we bring it out, okay, I would like us to communally think about how our service connects with our worship, okay? Also, I would like us to think about the expansive nature about the boundary of our sanctuary. So let me say more on that. Okay, one big thing, so not this past confirmation class, but 2 confirmation classes ago, we were talking about Luther's Small Catechism, and we got to talking about the Apostles' Creed, and we talked about the communion of saints. Communion of saints. And I asked them, what do you think the communion of saints is? And Ollie, God bless him, said, dead people. And he is absolutely right. He is absolutely right. The communion of saints is dead people, right? So when we talk about the expansive nature of our sanctuary, I've preached this in sermons before too, we imagine our altar rail wrapping around 360 degrees, because on the other side of the altar is our loved ones, right, who have gone before us into the communion of saints. We already do a somewhat good job of acknowledging that on a week-by-week basis. I would love us to carry that idea with us when we do worship planning. But there's also another sense to that idea of community that extends beyond, again, talking about the expansive boundaries of our sanctuary, into a different definition of that word, which is our community around us. And we've already, again, perfect segue, Andy, by the way, in talking about how do we connect what we do with our neighbors into what we do in worship, including our neighbors who are members of our community but can't be here, okay? Used to be once upon a time we had a lot of different teams of Eucharistic ministers. And I want to be careful with that word because for whatever reason that phrase terrifies people. I think it's because we use the Eucharistic, 4 syllables, that's a big word. And I think you all are afraid you're going to screw up communion. I don't know, I might be projecting here. You can't. You can't screw up. Well, you can, but that's a totally different track. One of the things that Cynthia pointed out is that the meal is the promise, right? It is the promise from God, and it is the promise that we taste in the bread and the wine. So if you do nothing more than go to somebody and share food and drink with them, you have brought them communion. And there's an expansive definition of that word as well. I would even go so far as to say if you just go and sit with somebody, you have brought communion to them. You've brought community to them, whether you remember to bring your communion kit or not. I'm going to drop another thing. I'm not going to press gang people today. So we've got our worship team. What I would like to create is this is a community team. I'm making up language on the fly. And this is going to be making more work for Linda, so I apologize to Linda, Linda Smith, insofar as that she would probably be helping to coordinate these groups of folk. And by coordinating, it's simply making sure that the people that need are getting matched with somebody that can. I want to train people to do visitation, okay? We have this weird rhythm here at MLC, which Linda can testify to, which is it's either feast or famine. We either have 25 people that acutely need visitation today, or it's crickets. And it's never in between, okay? And so, we will have weeks where we'll talk and we're like, is there anybody that needs to be visited? I don't know of anybody. And then the next week, we will be approached by 15 people after worship saying, did you hear about so-and-so? Did you hear about so-and-so? I'm like, you could have told us that the week before when we did, okay. Part of that is because our sole method of knowing who needs visitation is you all, okay? So one of my very selfish needs in creating a community team is having people that are connected with the people that can't be here. Okay. Shirley Meyer, who I talk about a lot, is very proactive about being connected to this community. She is at the far end of proactive, and there is no too much. There's no too proactive. If everybody could be like Shirley, I would be praising Jesus every day. Shirley invites people. Shirley reaches out and invites people to participate in her spiritual life. And in fact, speaking, foretaste of the feast to come, at the end of our sound and video upgrade process, which I don't know how long it's going to take, maybe 6 months, theoretically we'll be able to have Shirley read for us on Sunday mornings in worship. Yeah. Okay. There are a lot of Shirleys out there that don't say as much. Okay. There are a lot of folks out there that we've lost contact with, and I'm not going to name any names, and it's nobody's fault. As you know, as many of you probably know, living alone can be tough. And when you get used to living alone, I go through this with my dad, when you get used to living alone, and that's not necessarily you like it, but when you get used to living alone, you lose the capacity to communicate, right? Having community means that we are proactive in staying connected with our members, whether they can be here or not. And it's not just about people who are quote-unquote shut-ins. We have several people in our congregation, a few people in our congregation right now who haven't been able to participate in worship because they're going through health procedures and are immunocompromised and or just too sick to be here, okay? And you may not be able to visit them personally because we don't want to risk getting them infected with something which could compromise their immune system, but it might be nice to have somebody that makes sure that they know that we remember them besides me or Linda, right? Because we're paid staff, you are the church. And that's a little bit of a false dichotomy, right? I'm also the church too. We're all the church. Think about it. Pray about it. I will train you. And by train you, what I mean is I will hopefully dismiss all of your anxieties and give you a toolkit for sharing communion with somebody. You're going to have to figure out how to talk to people. I can't teach you how to do that. But you all know how to talk to people. You do it for 15 minutes when you share the piece already. So don't give me this crap. Linda, please share.
In another spiritual community in which I'm involved, we developed something that expands that a little bit more. We call it the Call Marthas. And we have people sign up for what they're available to do to help, because sometimes it's not just a visit. They need a ride to the doctor. They need someone to mow their lawn. They need someone to pick up groceries. They're not able to fix a meal. They might be on Meals on Wheels, but that's not every day or every meal. So I would like to expand it too, so that we do more of an outreach. We used to do that. We used to have meals here that people could pick up. But there's a lot of need out there, I think. And, like Jesse said, some it's just medical problems and they can't get out to buy their groceries. So I would love to expand that too. So think about what you might want to offer to people, so.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm experiencing this right now, right? My dad's friend dropped me off at the airport on Saturday. My dad's other friend, that's a different modifier. My dad's other friend brought my wallet to me when I forgot it at home, right? And that same friend filled up his wood furnace last night and this morning and is going to take him to PT tomorrow. And then yet another friend is going to take him to PT later in the week. They're all people that go to church with him, okay? He also lives in a rural community which, has different rules. Rules is the wrong word. But anybody grow up in a rural community? The downside of a rural community is everybody knows your secrets. But, the upside of a rural community is everybody's there for you when you need them, because everybody... What's that? Oh, yeah. I had a friend from town come do a sleepover with me when we were in 7th grade. And he was used to walking 2 blocks, not biking 2 miles. And so I'm like, we're going to go see my friend Adam, who lives down the street. He's like, how far is it? I'm like, yeah, it's about 2 miles. It was actually 5 miles, but for me, it was about 2 miles. Everything was about 2 miles, you know. Yeah, he learned, well, that was the last time he came. I also broke his thumb. That was a totally different. Hey, he couldn't hit my fastball. That's his problem. Yep. And one of the things I will say, because I've talked to folks about this and I've heard this reflective back, is that we're all aging, right? And we're all aging, right? Myself included. So I never want to impose expectations that risk your well-being. And a prime example of this, too, is that when folks are no longer able to transfer themselves in or out of a car, I don't want somebody who is already physically at risk trying to do that, okay? I don't think I need to preach this to you, okay? And here's another reality, is that that's also part of this process, is, for Shirley realizing when she just can't get to church. She could go if somebody she's physically fit enough, but she's not going to drive. She willingly gave up her keys because she knew it was a risk. I don't need to preach to you guys about this. This is just aging in a nutshell. There are boundaries to what we can do, but I would love us to at least come up to those boundaries in terms of our generosity. The other piece I would throw out there as we transition into service, which in my negative 5 minutes that I have left, are Ruby, go say what you're going to say, then I'll.
Okay, this was short. When my husband was ill, the fellas got together and put together a soup list. And every night, someone would bring him a bowl of soup.
I'm going to put something down here. Well, I'll just leave it in their community team, is caring for sick people. It's not great language.
Chicken noodle soup.
Chicken noodle soup, thank you. How many of you have brought food to somebody that's going through a medical procedure? All of you have. I don't need to ask. What have we thought about that on a church-wide understanding of it? Again, there are several things that come before that, which is knowing when somebody's sick, having their permission to communicate to them and or visit their home, all that stuff, right? That's kind of like, part of the, it takes a village to do it. But here's the thing, if we don't ever put the energy into creating this, it's never going to happen, right? Let's talk service real quick, and then we'll all get out of here. So again, I'm going to go back to Andy's example of bringing bread to our community. This is an extension of things that we've already talked about. We have several great service, charity, whatever you want to call them, aspects of our community which are thriving and amazing. I'm just going to name a short list. Obviously, our peacemakers, right? Our backpack buddies, which if you're not aware, we just took on 25 new students. Because we weren't already masochists enough. We'll get there when they're ready. And by the way, in case you were unaware, Kathy is the backpack buddy czar. I'm joking. What did I say? Peacemakers, backpack buddies. Brenda and Andrea, or Andrea's here. I think Brenda's over with the girls, and others. Those are the names that default to my brain. Have the pantry at Rowe Middle School. Okay. What am I forgetting? Blessing boxes. Thank you, Ruby. I'm going to stick with those. There are probably other ones out there that are my squirrels aren't doing their job. They've been running around too much. Yeah. The dogs are chasing them too, which doesn't help. I just described the work of about 15 to 20 people. Plus quilters, we expanded to 40. We worshipped, how many did we worship last Sunday, Mike? Do you know ballpark? 72. Yeah, 72. The week before we were at 81. What I'm getting at here is that we have 230-ish baptized membership, and we have about 40 people that are participating in the regular service of our community. Probably more than that, right? I mean, it's always a number plus 30% because there are people that occasionally participate. And this is not projecting guilt any way, shape, or form. Okay, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity, and this is always tough, right? Because I bet Andrea and/or Brenda would tell you that they have a smooth working process. Don't screw it up. Kathy will tell you for sure. She has a well-oiled machine that is in place. Don't come in to reinvent the wheel, okay? There is opportunity for us to take ownership of the work that we do. That can happen in multiple ways. It can happen in you asking Kathy if you can take a shift in packing backpacks, right? And Kathy can articulate other ways, and especially carrying heavy boxes of food up the stairs. That would be much appreciated. The quilters have an open invitation to learn to tie knots, right? That is definitely a way that you can tie. If you can tie your shoes, you can tie a knot. That might be a high bar for me. Blessing boxes right now are empty. They're empty, and because the pantry's empty. And that is not anybody's fault, okay? Again, there is no blame here. In fact, gratitude is what is being expressed here. Is there a way in which we could create a little bit of infrastructure to make sure that those are never empty? Yes, right? And it involves ducks, not squirrels, okay? But that's something that we need people to help with, right? Because again, and I am not overworked right now. Right now I'm not overworked, okay? But I have limited organizational capacity, whether I'm good at it or not, okay? So if everything falls in my lap or Linda's lap or even Joe's lap, there's not enough eyes on it to make sure that it's happening. Some of the things, again, blessing boxes as an example, could absolutely benefit from people who are simply tracking our inventory of canned goods, knowing what we need, being active in soliciting donations from our community, making sure there's an announcement when we need stuff, making that announcement, not leaving it up to me to try and puzzle through whatever the language is there, standing up, making an announcement, and or not just collecting cans or boxes or whatever, holding a fundraiser to support our blessing boxes, which can be combination supporting our pantry at Royal Middle School and our backpack buddies, right? Organizing fundraisers for all the various ministries, which do a double duty of getting more stuff for our things and letting our community know the stuff that we're doing, because we don't need to have everything come from here, okay? We're bringing food to our community. I'm sure there are plenty of people in our community who would like to work in that, but if they don't know what's going on, they don't know that they're not invited to do it, then it's never going to happen, right?
Where does the MLC Women's Group fit into all this?
They are definitely part of that service picture, and this is a perfect example of, how many of you remember back when there were the ELCA? How many of you remember ELCA when it was a thing? Yeah, my grandmother was the queen of the ELCA committee forever and ever. Amen. She let nobody pry that from her fingers. It does still exist. The women of the ELCA. Okay, here is one of the things that has diminished due to a war of attrition, which is we had much stronger synod-wide and church-wide social service groups, right? It wasn't just women. There were dedicated men's groups that wasn't just MLC. It was synod-wide. You would meet, and some of this I don't remember because it never existed for me growing up. I want to throw that out for you guys. Men in Mission, yeah, I never experienced any of this. When I came of age as a pastor, most of this stuff was already dead and gone, or dying and going, okay? So I don't have this in my memory. Our women here at MLC is combination a relic of that, and I don't mean relic in bad terms, okay? Holy relic. It is a holy relic, like the finger bone of St. Peter. yeah. The finger bone of St. Peter, yes. by which I mean it should be framed in a locket and worn on high holy days. But it's partly that still has purpose. From a social perspective, right? So Linda is organizing women's lunches, which is kind of an aspect of that. There is the women's group, which still holds funds and does the bake sale. They're also kind of like sort of the quilting group as well, too. There's a lot of overlap there. I don't know. Does that kind of answer? Oh, I see what you're saying. You've got your finger on the pulse of something really important here. No, it's good. Okay. 2 more minutes, and then I really do need to get going. Yeah. Let me name a couple of things. Yeah, even Paul. Are you saying Paul is a unique example of masculinity? And yeah. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. As an example of masculinity. You're non-discriminatory, neither age nor gender nor sexuality. Yes. Let me just say something to that. And this is a growing edge for our denomination, for our church. And our growing edge is also pressing up against some cultural things. And here's what it is. The history of the church is very gender separate, okay? Men did men's things, women did women's things. This isn't just the church, this is humanity, right? The world has changed. I cook, my wife brings home the bacon. Okay? This is how our relationship. I learned this from my grandfather. God rest his soul. My grandfather is who I got my passion for cooking from. He cooked, my grandmother baked. That was their division of labor. It worked very well for them. The world has changed a lot, okay? Women don't sit in the kitchen waiting for their husband to get home from their advertising job, cocktail in hand with their best dress on anymore. Or do you still do that? I don't know. Len doesn't do that. Although I think she expects me to do that. Yeah. Does Kathy do this? God bless. No. Those social norms were mirrored in church, right? So, for example, ELCA, right? There were the women's groups and there were the men's groups. And some of that has value. Don't need to get rid of it, right? Paul can especially, and we have talked about this before, articulate the value of having groups for men to explore everything manly. But masculinity, especially for growing men, for men that are learning to be men in this new wide world that is scary and different than the one that their parents were raised in. So there is value in that, but there is a tendency to make sacred cows out of those things. In other words, men do men's things, women do women's things. The women take care of the altar guild, the men rake the leaves. Okay. None of those things need to exist anymore. Those boundaries do not need to exist. They can exist if they have value, but we don't need to cling to any of those rules. So, Susan, you talk about how can we maybe de-gender some of our work. Yeah, let's just get men to show up. and there's a lot there too. Maybe it's more intentional invitation. You can't just put an announcement in the bulletin. You need to ask people. That's a very important part. And I would say this is a good rule of thumb for everything we've talked about. If you want to see it happen, put an announcement in the bulletin, but ask somebody. Pat, go ahead. Yes. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. And you articulated something very helpful there, which is lowering the bar, right? Lowering that activation threshold, to use some chemistry language, right? Which is very important. And personal invitations. I can't not stress that enough.
Following up on what Pat said, we belong to a church that had, as part of the stewardship in November, they had a whole list of things that they would pass out. Things like do readings in church, make phone calls, bake goods, and things like that, so that you would know who to ask rather than just making cold calls on people because it's a woman. They might make cookies.
I love that idea. In fact, yeah. Well, we had thank offering. Yeah. The in-gathering. Is that what we call the in-gathering? Something like that. Where does that go? You know what I'm going to do with these notes? I'm going to hand them to somebody who wasn't here and have them try to puzzle out what I'm talking about. I promise I will remember that. Yeah, thanks, Ruby. You saved my life every Sunday. Yeah, I do need to get to church. And you're joking, but there's a danger to this. If people know we're doing these things, we're going to stop. Thank you, everybody. Here, two reminders. We are absolutely doing things for this next week and the following week. So next week, the 8th, I'm going to talk about Ruth. We're going to wrap up on Ruth. I'll have some other stuff to talk about. The bishop is going to be here to preach, not do education hour. I'm going to talk about Advent, okay? Jamie McCarr was sick today, which is why she wasn't here to take care of the girls, whoever showed up for Sunday school. She will hopefully be able to be here next Sunday. We're going to do intergenerational things. So I'll be talking about, finishing up Ruth, talking about Advent, and we're going to make Advent wreaths with the kids in here, okay? We're going to do the same thing the following week. There'll be potentially the same or a new craft project, and I'm going to talk about Advent some more. And then the 22nd, I'm not coming in at 9:30. I will come in at 11 for worship, but that's the week of Christmas. I got lots of stuff to do. Thank you. See you in 15 minutes. Okay, I'll hand you the mic.